Soldiers on the Moon, screams a headline on the website armyhistory.org. The Army's strange but true plan for a lunar outpost. The headline refers to Project Horizon, a 1959 study to look into the feasibility of establishing a permanent military and scientific base on the Moon. The report is titled Project Horizon, a U.S. Army study for the establishment of a lunar military outpost. According to the report,
quote,
the primary objective is to establish the first permanent manned installation on the Moon.
Unquote.
The authors of the report overestimated the ease of getting to and from the Moon. Their projected operational date for this base was December 1966. The Apollo moon landing didn't happen until 1969. This report is hundreds of pages, so I'm going to mostly cover the introductory pages that provide an overview of the plans. According to this document, the United States Army considered building a lunar military outpost to protect its interests on the Moon and to develop new ways to properly monitor the Earth in space. The planned outpost would have been used to explore the Moon and space, and it would have been used for military operations if the need arose. The initial plan was for an outpost large enough and with enough equipment that a group of 10 to 20 people could live and work there. But it would be designed with expansion in mind. They also wanted the base,
quote,
to be self-sufficient for as long as possible without outside support.
Unquote.
Another important consideration was,
quote,
the defense of the base against attack if required.
Unquote.
The report also emphasized the importance of establishing a base before the Soviet Union.
Quote,
because invaluable scientific, military, and political prestige will come to the nation that first establishes a lunar base, it is imperative that the United States be first.
Unquote.
In the 1960s, America was involved in a space race with the Soviet Union. Now the US is involved in a new space race and is once again planning a base on the Moon. In an interview with Politico, NASA Administrator Bill Nelson said that the US is in a space race with China and expressed fears that,
quote,
under the guise of scientific research,
unquote,
China will try to dominate the most resource-rich locations of the lunar surface and may also attempt to keep other space agencies out. A UN treaty called the Outer Space Treaty, signed in 1967, is supposed to prevent this. The treaty prohibits nations or companies from claiming sovereignty over the Moon or making it their own territory. However, given the vast resources in the solar system, it is possible that this treaty won't be honored. For example, the value of precious metals in the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter is an estimated 700 quintillion. The ability to deny other nations access to space could potentially grant all that wealth to whichever nation establishes a permanent presence first. The Project Horizon report points out the advantages of being first.
Quote,
the employment of moon-based weapon systems against Earth or space targets may prove to be feasible and desirable. Moon-based military power will be a strong deterrent to war because of the extreme difficulty, from the enemy point of view, of eliminating our ability to retaliate. Any military operations on the Moon will be difficult to counter by the enemy because of the difficulty of his reaching the Moon if our forces are already present, and of means of countering a landing of or neutralizing any hostile forces that have landed. The situation is reversed if hostile forces are permitted to arrive first. They can militarily counter our landings and attempt to deny us politically the use of their property.
Unquote.
The report also details the importance of the Moon for both scientific and commercial purposes.
Quote,
study of the universe, of the Moon, and of the space environment will all be aided by scientific effort on the Moon. Perhaps the most promising scientific advantage is the usefulness of a moon base for further explorations into space. Materials on the moon itself may prove to be valuable and commercially exploitable.
Unquote.
The lunar base was to be overseen by the military rather than being a civilian operation.
Quote.
Once established, the lunar base will be operated under the control of a unified space command. Space, or certainly that portion of outer space encompassing the Earth and the Moon, will be considered a military theater. The control of all United States military forces by unified commands is already established, and military operations in space should be no exception. A unified space command would control and utilize, besides the lunar base, operational military satellites and space vehicles, space surveillance systems, and the logistical support thereof. Other space commands might be organized as our operations extended to translunar space.
Unquote.
Under a section titled Degree of Urgency, the report expressed the same concerns about the Soviet Union being first to the moon that NASA Chief Bill Nelson claims about China now.
Quote.
To be second to the Soviet Union in establishing an outpost on the moon would be disastrous to our nation's prestige and in turn to our democratic philosophy. Although it is contrary to United States policy, the Soviet Union, in establishing the first permanent base, may claim the moon or critical areas thereof for its own. Then a subsequent attempt to establish an outpost by the United States might be considered and propagandized as a hostile act.
Unquote.
The report also addresses keeping the base supplied from Earth.
Quote.
The maintenance and supply effort to support a lunar base will be high by present standards. Continued delivery of equipment and means of survival will be required, and each delivery will be costly. Every conceivable solution for minimizing the logistic effort must be explored. Maximum use of any oxygen or power source on the moon, through regenerative or other techniques, must be exploited. Means of returning safely to Earth must be available to occupants of the outpost.
Unquote.
The report addresses how to protect residents of the base from the harsh lunar environment.
Quote.
Two broad problem areas must be considered in meeting the requirement. One is the design and construction of the outpost. The other is the transportation required to establish and support the outpost. The outpost itself could have one of several forms, or be a combination of them. Holes or caves could be covered and sealed with pressure bags. By this means, temperature extremes are alleviated and vulnerability to meteorites is lessened. Expansive slabs or folding sections could be set on the surface. The rocket transport vehicle itself, or a used fuel tank saved for the purpose, could be used. A number of solutions to providing power and sustaining life are possible. By using solar or nuclear power, oxygen and water may be extracted from the natural environment should be attainable.
Unquote.
The report also considered how to get people to and from the moon.
Quote.
The transport could be accomplished either by direct movement by multi-stage rocket to the moon, or by the use of intermediate orbiting space stations. The first solution imposes enormous power requirements to lift a load of any significance, but should not be overlooked. The second solution has promise of early success because it can be accomplished with rocket engines now under development. By the use of vehicles with 1.5 million pound thrust first stage and high energy upper stages, significant loads can be placed in orbit and assembled for further travel to the moon and return. 15 such vehicles can place enough equipment in orbit to assemble a vehicle approaching 500,000 pounds in weight. A series of 500,000 pound space vehicles is adequate to establish and support the outpost.
Unquote.
The report discusses using the base as a launching site for exploration of the solar system.
Quote,
These volumes have focused on the goal of establishing a lunar outpost capable of supporting 12 people. This represents a large capital expenditure. Once established, the cost is shown decreasing as a result of eliminating the capital expenditure and continuing only the life support resupply. In order to realize a full return on the investment involved, it will obviously be desired to establish additional equipment at the outpost in quantity. For example, the use of the moon as a launching site for manned or unmanned planetary expeditions will be highly desirable.
Unquote.
Of course, residents of the base would need to eat.
Quote,
4 pounds of food per man per day is planned for the outpost ration. All food will be sent pre-cooked and packaged in individual portions. It may be preserved by heat, canning, dehydration, or irradiation, and when freezer storage facilities are available, by freezing. Foods to be consumed hot will be heated by immersion of the package in boiling water. As the water inventory builds up, dehydrated foods can be favored to lighten the resupply load. When facilities permit grilling or broiling, uncooked meat will be irradiated, dehydrated, and/or frozen. Men outside the shelter will be provided with paste foods in collapsible containers or with shaped solid foods, either of which can be valved or locked into the helmet without loss of internal pressure. It has been demonstrated that algae can be processed into acceptable and nutritious food. Further development effort in this area is to be expected. Previous experience has demonstrated the morale value of fresh salads. Vegetables for salads may be provided by hydroponic culture using waste as nutrients, at least in part, and converting CO2 into O2 in the process, as with algae. Ultimately, plant waste and algae can be used to feed poultry, which thrive in confinement and are relatively efficient energy converters, producing fresh eggs and meat. Meanwhile, attention will be given to the use of fish and other aquatic animals, such as Daphnia and mollusks, which normally feed on algae.
Unquote.
As part of its Artemis mission, NASA is planning a moon base that is expected to be operational by the mid-2030s. That means roughly 75 years from when Project Horizon was proposed to when a moon base potentially becomes a reality. NASA says the moon base will initially facilitate missions of a week or two, but as the camp grows in both size and sophistication, they plan to have crews stay for up to 2 months.
Thanks for watching. Check the description for links, and don't forget to like and subscribe.